Thank you. YB, Tuan Anthony Loke, thank you for being with us here today. A very warm welcome to you, YB, to Invest Malaysia. There's quite a fair bit for us to cover over the next 45 minutes. YB, allow me to begin by setting some context. Now, since time immemorial, Malaysia has been at the heart of the ASEAN trade network. With China and India taking their seats on the global stage, Malaysia is poised to benefit thanks to its strategic location between the two powers. Now, COVID threw a spanner into the works, with international travel and trade being curtailed for the better part of 2 years. But that is behind us. I'm sure I can speak for all of us in this room when I say that it feels very good to be able to travel again, whether the purpose is for business or for pleasure. Without further ado, Yang Muhammad, let's start off on some pertinent questions that the capital market has been asking. Due to Yang Muhammad's sizable portfolio in the ministry involving aviation, maritime, and land transport, now let us begin our conversation with the exciting subject of aviation. YB, this new operating agreement between the government of Malaysia and Malaysia Airports has been in conversation for several years now. After more than a couple of false starts, investors were beginning to get the feeling that the operating agreement was not going to happen. But only 2+ months into your role as the Minister of Transport, you have agreed in principle to material terms of the operating agreement. YB Anthony, what prompted your quick response? And although we know that not all the details are out, can we have an idea of what is to be expected from that new operating agreement?
Thank you. A very good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for having me here. Perhaps I don't usually address a big investor forum like this. Usually my platform is more political. But anyway, thanks and happy to be here and to answer some questions. Of course, the operating agreement is an important piece of agreement between Government of Malaysia and MAHB. And I know that the fund managers are always paying a lot of attention to the development of the OAs. What happened was, I think the discussion was held, I think, for many years. As you know, I think back in 2019, during my first tenure in MOT, there was actually a restructuring of the OA into 4 OAs to make it more cluster-based, not just one agreement covering all airports, but make it more cluster. But I think over the few years, more discussions were held to review it. And finally, we still stick back to 2 OAs. And after going through some of the salient points, I think that it's important to go ahead and to sign the new OA with MAHB. I know, number one, this is very important to MAHB. Number two, it's very important to the investors as well, to know what is the future of our airport developments. And number three, as far as MOT is concerned, what we want is more flexibility in terms of developing our smaller airports. Because under the current OA, it is quite rigid, because the OA is just an agreement by the Government of Malaysia to let MAHB to operate. But in terms of funding, in terms of capex, in terms of development or carving out any smaller airports, it is never inside the current OA. So the new OA wants to have more flexibility for MAHB and for the Government of Malaysia to look at not just KLIA, but the smaller airports. There are a lot of interest in terms of the smaller airports. It is not at the expense of MAHB. I think the new OA to be signed will cover the interests of MAHB. Any kind of new arrangement, any new development, or any carving out of any particular airport will not be done unless MAHB agrees to it. I think that is a key feature in the new OA. And the new OA also create a mechanism for better funding mechanism for future airports development. We will create an airport development fund, ADF, which will take partly from the user fee, which was contributed by MHB to the government. Portion of it, 50% of it, will be channeled to the ADF, so that we will have a ready fund in terms of giving capex to some airports development, in particularly the smaller airports. As you know, airports development have always been a contentious issue. A lot of states are asking for their airports to be upgraded, to be enhanced, to be expanded. But year in and year out, we always try to get the allocation from MOF. But every year we can give probably very little. Probably 1 or 2 airports will be given attention. But we have a network of so many airports around the country. Every single airport needs to be expanded. So I think the ADF is one way that we can give a clearer guideline in terms of funding mechanism.
Thank you, YB. Apart from the ADF, will the regulated asset-based model be adopted under the new operating agreement?
Well, the new operating agreement gives flexibility between the government and MHB to look at every single project. RAB is just one of the model. It can be any other model. So we do not fix it that RAB must be implemented across the board, because not every single airport has the same features. Some airports are more profit-driven, of course, more profitable, compared to some smaller airports, which probably, in terms of the return, will not be so fast. So I think not one model that can fit every single airport. So we are flexible on that, and the OA stated very clearly that every single project, it will be a discussion between MHB and the government to look at the return model for MHB.
So I think YB, it's safe to say that from what you have just described, the approach is to look at it holistically for MAHB, that ultimately, whatever CAPEX, OPEX that's undertaken, is economically viable for MAHB. Thank you.
That's right.
Thank you.
Precisely.
So, YB, we're going to move on to something closer to us here. It's actually about the Subang Airport, or the Sultan Abdul Aziz Airport regeneration plan, right? In fact, I think you were quoted just yesterday, speaking about it. Now, you had announced the Subang Airport regeneration plan just days before announcing the new operating agreement with Malaysia Airports. Now, again, this is a plan that has been bandied about for a number of years, but it has only now come to fruition. Can you tell us a little bit more about this plan and why, it's described as a green airport?
Well, I mean, why it was announced almost on the same week, for the simple reason, both papers were presented to the cabinet on the same day. So we approved both papers on the same day. But in terms of media strategy, I don't announce every single thing on the same day. So that's part of my media strategy, so that I can be on the press every day. Okay. So that is always my media strategy. I don't give all means at the same time. So we break down in a few days, so that one single week I have a few major announcements, because it was decided the week before during the cabinet meeting. Both papers were actually, as you rightly said, it has been deliberated, has been reviewed many times, many years within the ministry. And by the time there was the new government in place, the officer just came to me and said, "These are all ready. Are you willing, or are you prepared to present it to cabinet quick and fast?" So I said, let's do it. Subang, of course, it has been a lot of debate about the development of Subang Airport. Most of the debate were very politicized in the first place. So I think one factor and one narrative that we were very, very clear is that the Subang Airport regeneration plan must be spearheaded by MHB, because MHB has the operating agreement of all airports, including Subang. But MHB also has an agreement with Subang Sky Park to operate the Terminal 3. So in order to regenerate and redevelop the entire Subang, of course, the entire process must be spearheaded by MHB. After the policy approval, then Cabinet directs MHB to come back with a business proposal of how to do it, how to implement it, what is the structure, and so on. So this will be presented back to the Cabinet. Our deadline to MHB is by end of this quarter, that they have to come back to us in terms of a business proposal. How do they want to do it? Either through a JV, through a partnership with any other parties. That is entirely up to MHB to deliberate. And the board has to decide and to come back to us with a proposal. What we want them to do is to make sure that the process can be fastened and the plan can be executed as soon as possible. Because we look at the values of Subang as a city airport. And why I say green airport is because definitely when we develop a new terminal, definitely all the new features, environmental friendly features must be there in the airport. And we limit it to narrow body aircraft. And we want the newer generation of aircraft to be deployed in Subang. So that's why we said we want to earmark Subang as a green airport.
Thank you, YB. So, so when you say green airport, I mean, I hear you on that point. Certainly something that we look forward to. There's this concern that there's been a lot of development around the Subang Airport area since the 90s and the early 2000s when the airlines moved across to KLIA. So there's a lot of residential development that has come up. Do you believe that there might be some concern that the public may not be fully supportive of this plan?
Well, we are fully aware that that's why we said this is not an airport to replace KLIA. Even after regeneration, redevelopment, the maximum capacity is up to 8 million per annum, 8 MPPA, compared to 1.5 billion right now. That's why we limit it to just single narrow body aircraft. And the airport is, in fact, is still operational. It is not a new airport that we are building in Subang. It is operational. It is still a single runway. We are not going to expand it to a 2 runway. It is still single runway. But definitely there will be a little bit more movement in terms of aircraft. But as I said, that we will impose some conditions that a new generation aircraft have to be deployed in that particular airport to address the concerns of noise pollution and all that. In terms of traffic jam in that area, of course, we know that it is very congested in that area. And the moment that airport is redeveloped, there is actually a rail link between Subang and KL Central, which probably a lot of people know, but not many people use that rail link. That's why I suspended that rail service for the time being between Subang Sky Park to KL Central. For the simple reason right now, the ridership is only less than 100 a day right now. So we are spending millions of ringgit to subsidize that train service. Might as well I suspend it for the next 2 to 3 years. Upon regeneration, upon redevelopment of Subang Airport, definitely that rail link will be reused to connect Subang Airport with KL Central. That is definitely one features which make Subang a very, very viable city airport because that connects Subang to KL Central directly.
Thank you, YB. That's actually very insightful on what the plans are for Subang. Now, still on aviation, right? Air connectivity across the South China Sea can be further improved. Now, in addition, current airfares are comparable, or if not actually higher than that of pre-COVID times. YB, could you kindly enlighten us on what the government is doing to strengthen the air connectivity between Peninsula and East Malaysia?
Well, this is one major topic always raised up in Parliament. In fact, tomorrow we have questions in Parliament. A lot of the MPs debated about this. From the MP point of view, many Sabah Sarawakian MPs asked that the government continue to subsidize, to increase subsidy in terms of the connectivity between KL and Sabah Sarawak. And also there are calls in terms of putting a ceiling price into the airfare. But this is not something that we are going to adopt in terms of ceiling price. I know that the moment if we put a ceiling price, it is not exciting for the capital markets, it's not exciting for the private sector. It will send a wrong message because we adopt a market economy. We still believe that dynamic pricing is the way forward. But we know that the issue of high airfare is quite sensitive to the people because it is a necessity in terms of between Sabah and Sarawak to come to KL. What we do is that to encourage to increase more capacity. That's why there are more airline services available right now. The government through MEFCOM has issued another license just 1 year ago that there is a new airline serving between KL and between Semenanjung and Sabah Sarawak in the name of My Airlines. All other airlines, we encourage them to increase the capacity. For festive season, we encourage them to do more additional flights to make more fixed fare prices, which I just launched yesterday for the Hari Raya season. And we know that for the airline industry, most of the airline are facing with shortage of aircraft right now because many of their aircraft were grounded during COVID and they need a lot of capital expenditure in terms of reviving their aircraft. So these are issues and challenges faced by the aviation industry, which of course the government will try to help in terms of how to facilitate them to be back, to have more aircraft on the air. And one of the major important agencies which will facilitate this will be CAM, because every aircraft to go back to be operational, they need approval from CAM.
Thank you, YB. Perhaps we can move, from the skies to the oceans and speak a little bit about the maritime segment, right? One of the questions really is over at the ports, right? But in particular, Westports. Now, Westports has about an 80% market share of Port Klang's container traffic, right? And it has reached about 71% utilization in 2022. Now, the finalization of Westports' new concession, which entails expanding the port's capacity, has already been delayed for a couple of years. Now, this is despite having most of the checklists done up for quite a while, namely that they have completed their technical studies, they have obtained EIA approvals, they have also finalized the concession terms with the Port Klang Authority. Now, we understand this conversation has already begun to accelerate recently. Would YB be able to give us a bit of color on what we can expect from the new concession in terms of capacity expansion, and maybe even, if possible, the timeline in finalizing that new concession?
Well, we hope that we can do things as fast as possible, as long as my officers can complete all the paperwork. Definitely, we will have no hindrance in terms of bringing it to cabinet for approval. Definitely, in terms of expansion for Westport, it's important. Westport current capacity is 14 million TEUs a year. After expansion, it will be expected to increase by almost one-fold. Another 13 million TEUs to be expanded. That means Westport 1 plus Westport 2, total capacity will be 27 million TEUs in the next 10 years or so. So that expansion will definitely add more capacity for Westport to grow. But this expansion is almost like maximum because the entire Westport 2 will be on reclaimed land. And there are only certain limits to that reclaimed land because it's almost nearing Pulau Carrie, which of course is earmarked for another port projects. In terms of the finalization of the concession, I can only say that I will try to do it as soon as possible. I know it is important, not only in terms of for Westport, but for the expansion of the entire Port Klang is important. Definitely, we are looking at probably latest by the second half of this year.
Thank you, YB. Now, you mentioned Pulau Carrie, and that's interesting because PM also mentioned Pulau Carrie, and I think this is the second time PM has mentioned Pulau Carrie as well. We are aware that the government is exploring to construct a third port infrastructure in Klang, and this will be the Pulau Carrie deep sea port, and that's going to double the Port Klang's current capacity. But there is also a view that this project will also result in unnecessary competition in Port Klang. YB, would you be able to share your thoughts on this? I mean, one of the views is that would it not be better to focus on expanding the existing ports, which is a more economic option?
Well, the Pulau Carrie third port has been studied since 2019. During my first tenure, Cabinet has approved for Port Klang Authority to do a feasibility study on the viability of having a third port in Pulau Carrie. The study has taken almost more than 2 years and has finally shown that it is viable, it is feasible to have a third port in terms of the technical factors. It is all feasible to have the third port there. And whether or not the third port will give direct competition to the existing ports, whether or not should we just focus on the existing ports, I think it's not mutually exclusive. We can do both together. We are not stopping the expansion of Westport. Westport 2 will continue, despite announcing the third port in Pulau Carrie. Because the third port in Pulau Carrie, it is a project spanning over 30 years. It is not at one go. And in fact, I just got a briefing last week from PKA, and under our planning, the port will be broken into 4 phases. Phase 1A, if even everything goes well, it will only begin in 2025. 1B, phase 1B, 2036, phase 2, 2043, and phase 3, 2052. That means it's a 30 years project, long-term project. And a mega port such as this scale will need at least 20 to 30 years in terms of planning and execution. To us, taken more than 10 years to be completed. Same goes to Pulau Carrie. And in the first phase, we are not going to focus on container port. It is more conventional cargo, conventional terminal that we are focusing on the first phase. Because currently, as you know, Westport is a fully containerized terminal. No bulk cargo operated from Westport. It's only Northport. But Northport, in terms of capacity, is very limited because of the size of that port. So the third port will focus more on conventional cargo. And dry bulk terminals and liquid bulk terminals will be the first phase in terms of Pulau Carrie port. So it is not in direct competition with Westport and Northport expansion. Northport is very limited space for expansion. The only expansions which is possible right now is Westport 2. But that also will go into the next few years. But under our studies, even with Westport 2, fully operational, 27 million TEUs, we will probably reach that capacity in the late 2030s. So when Pulau Carrie port comes into picture in 2030s or 2040s, it's just nice in terms of providing more capacity.
Thank you. I think that provides a lot of clarity for all of us. It's really it's good to see that we are planning in capacity into the future. So YB, on another question on another port, right? And it's about being competitive and remaining competitive, right? Now, Pelabuhan Tanjung Pelepas, PTP, they had they recorded stellar performances since the start of the pandemic, and also benefited from excess capacity as a transshipment port, while a lot of other ports were actually suffering from pandemic-induced congestions. Now, just across the Straits of Johor from PTP, the Port of Singapore Authority, or PSA, is expected to move or migrate all their operations to Tuas Port by 2027. Tuas Port will increase Singapore's container handling capacity to 65 million TEUs from 35 million presently. Now that entire development is expected to complete by 2040. YB, what is your view on the competitive threats from this mega port, which is Tuas Port, and what is it that we can do to keep our ports competitive? Now, on that same note, YB, our port handling charges are already significantly lower when compared to PSA. Would a tariff revision be a possibility?
Tariff revision has always been a possibility. I mean, in fact, we have not stopped tariff revision. I remember, during my first tenure, the first thing that I signed was a tariff revision for Port Klang. And same goes to PTP. Every now and then, every few years, there will be revision in terms of tariff to make up to the current market rate. In terms of making PTP more competitive, of course, I know PTP have a lot of their own initiative as well to make their port more productive, to make their turnaround time faster, to make it more viable. And PTP, as you know, when it was started, it was nothing. So nobody think that PTP will succeed just next to Singapore, but it succeeded. So I think the same spirit should be applied in terms of competition with Tuas. Yes, Tuas is very near. In fact, from PTP, you can look across Tuas. It's just within a few kilometers. I think the CEO of PTP always told me from his office can look towards Tuas, how many ships are birding there. But that does not stop us from competing with Tuas. I think that we should have a bit more confidence in terms of our ability to compete. And I think in terms of operation, in terms of productivity, PTP I think is catching up. A lot of initiative, including having more autonomous vehicle, within the port, a pilot project is being done and all that. And overall, in terms of management, it has done well. As you know, all our federal ports are privatized, and the private sector definitely have to compete in terms of keeping up to the market. And as far as the government is concerned, what we will try to do is to continuously review our regulations. Any regulations which make us non-competitive vis-a-vis our neighbors, vis-a-vis our competitors, will be given attention. And I know that maritime, there are a lot of issues, a lot of regulations which we have to review from time to time. I'm no expert in maritime. I as always said, we are open to feedback from industry players. Anytime that industry players come to us to show us that what are the specific regulations which make us more non-competitive, we are more than happy to look at it and to review it. I'll give an example. A few years back, a lot of industry players told us why our transshipment hub is not competitive compared to Singapore. Because many of the goods passing through our transshipment hub, even as transshipment goods, needs to apply for AP. Even mineral water transshipped towards through our ports needs an AP. We took a process to review all that, and eventually, after 2 years, all these APs were taken away. So that make us more competitive in terms as a transshipment hub. I think these are the spirit that we will continue to pursue, and we hope that we can do more to make our regulations less stringent and to make our ports more competitive.
Thank you, YB. That's actually very good to hear that we are progressing well in making our ports more competitive. Let's move on to ports in East Malaysia, Bintulu Port in particular. Yeah. So the Sarawak government was reported to have said that the state wants to revert Bintulu Port from the federal government as part of Sarawak's strategy for overall development of ports in the state. The state government wants Bintulu Port to be part of a cluster of state ports under a central port authority to be incorporated by a state law. Now, tariff revision is also one area that the Central Port Authority will then look into. YB, what are your thoughts on this, especially on the change in status, especially considering that Bintulu Port's concession has expired in December 2022, and it is running on an interim concession which will expire in June this year. How will that change the economics for Bintulu Port? The state port status, what are the advantages, or disadvantages as a state port compared to a federal port, if they are?
Well, I think these are two different issues. The concession of the Bintulu port operators of course, the discussion is still ongoing. The concession agreement has ended. Right now it's operating based on interim. But I think the discussion is still ongoing in terms of expanding or continue with the concession. The other issue is that Sarawak State Government has requested to look at the possibility of reverting Bintulu Port as a state port. Of course, official meeting has been held between myself and Deputy Premier, and preliminary discussion has been held, and we are forming a committee to look at what is the mechanism if we can ever do that, because it involves federal legislation. As you know, Bintulu Port Authority is legislated under an Act of Parliament, and then there are a lot of assets there. What is the view of Petronas and all that? All that have to be taken into consideration. Even if we have crossed all that hurdles and come up with a list of solutions and to know what we should do to go towards making Bintulu Port as a state port, I still need to go to the cabinet for approval. So right now it's still a very, very preliminary stage, and we are open for discussion. As you know that the federal government and Sarawak government is in a friendly relationship. We are both in a unity government right now. We don't say no to our partners in Sarawak. We are open for discussion, but that will take a long process for that to happen.
Thank you, YB. There are some questions that are coming in from the audience as well through the Slido, and actually it's a similar question to what we do have. So there's a question on the Cabotage policy review. Now, the federal government was reported to be reviewing the Cabotage policy restrictions. Now, this is a move that could lead up to the opening of Malaysian waters to foreign flag vessels. Now, is this expected to only cover certain non-commercial vessels, such as, say, specialized submarine cable repair vessels, or is the government exploring a wider cabotage policy review, which may affect commercial vessels, including the container or conventional vessels? YB, would you be able to share with us what are the government's key priorities under this review?
No, I think, first of all, the exemption to cabotage right now is between Semenanjung and Sabah Sarawak. That has been in place, if I'm not mistaken, since 2017. The exemption to cabotage, so that foreign vessels can call directly to Sabah and Sarawak, or they can call between ports in Sabah and Sarawak. That is in place right now. There are calls from Sarawak to reinstate back the cabotage because there is a strong shipping industry in Sarawak. But Sabah has taken a different stance on that. They want the exemption to be in place. What is being reported in the media is more about the review about one particular segment, which is the undersea cable repair. That which was, I gave the exemption way back in 2019, which was, of course, it's just a very, very small segment in terms of just the repair work for undersea cable, which was requested by the telco industry, because at the time they say that one of the reasons why the telcos or big telecommunication companies reluctant to invest in our data center is because it took a long time for them to repair if there's any problem with their undersea cable. And it came to me. I said, this is under MOT. Can you help? Can you do something? Which together with Gobind Singh then, the Minister of Communications, we took a position to give an exemption to that particular segment, which was hardly actually become news at the time. We make a statement about it. Even the press did not really cover it. But it became a big debate when the previous government, my successor and my predecessor right now, reviewed that exemption and reinstate back the cabotage. But that has created a big debate, and a lot of companies make complaints about that. So we hope that to review it and to see whether or not it's possible to give back exemption to that particular segment.
Thank you for the clarity, YB. Now, moving on to land transportation, and in particular, urban rail transportation, YB. Now, Peninsular Malaysia has an extensive network of highways, while the completion of the Pan-Borneo-Sabah Sarawak Highway will open up more opportunities for investments and economic activities in interior East Malaysia. Now, in terms of urban mobility in particular, public rail transport, in the Klang Valley MRT second line will open this month, right? During budget 2023, the budget spoke on MRT3 or the Circle Line, which is expected to start construction after the project cost, which was estimated at about RM 50 billion last year, is reduced, possibly to under ringgit 45 billion. In Johor, the RTS link is also currently under construction. Now, can YB Anthony share with us the ministry's priorities or plans in encouraging, promoting public transportation as the mode of urban transportation?
Well, for sure, as far as MOT is concerned, we heavily promote the usage of public transport. And we welcome any allocation in terms of developing public infrastructure for public transportation. MRT3 is, of course, one important project to make sure that our MRT network within Klang Valley is more completed. It's more complete when there's a circle line to have more connectivity. That is right now is almost at the final process in terms of awarding the contracts. The tender process has been done, but Minister of Finance wanted that price tag to be reviewed to make it lower, and we have to find ways to do it. Of course, MRT Corp has some ideas of how to do it in terms of more collaboration with private sectors, especially private landowners, to make sure that our stations can be focused more on TODs along the line, which of course in Klang Valley is highly possible and highly viable. That is one way to reduce the cost of the MRT3 project. We welcome any kind of projects to be given for MOT to take up. RTS definitely is an important project, and RTS, the financing model is directly under development expenditure from DE. As you know, most LRT and MRT project is off budget. It is funded through SPVs by MRT Corp, issuance bonds and so on. But for RTS, it is a direct project under MOT. And that particular project, there is a very strict timeline because it is a bilateral project with Singapore. And we must get it done before 2026, and it must be operational by 1st of January 2027. And that timeline is non-negotiable. As far as I'm concerned, we are committed to that.
Thank you, YB. On this point, YB, in relation to Penang Island, right? Penang is getting very, very congested, especially during rush hours and during public holidays. Now, there was a proposal, the Bayan Lepas LRT proposal. Is that still on the cards for Penang?
Well, I just had a visit to Penang last week, and we had a meeting with the Penang State Government. Bayan Lepas LRT project is still very much in the pipeline. The Penang State Government wants to pursue the project, and I've given some views about that to see how we can collaborate, how to execute that project. I think right now we have some discussion at the official level.
Thank you. I'm from Penang, so it's nice to see development coming to Penang too. ECRL. This is a question that, in the Slido, it keeps on coming up. So there's a lot of questions on ECRL, so I think I'm obliged to go with the audience and ask you this question. Now, actually, you've spoken about this before. You mentioned just after you took on the ministerial role in December that the government is not looking to amend the ECRL link project, right? Now, 3 months on, is this still the case in terms of rail alignment? Also, insofar as the project costs for ECRL, will that be reviewed considering that MRT3 is now being reviewed? And are we actually on target for completion by end 2026?
Well, my position still remains the same, and as far as the government is concerned, it still remains the same. Whatever we have committed and signed up, we are committed to it. There's no changes in terms of ECRL alignment. And ECRL, of course, is different from MRT3. MRT3 is yet to be to kickstart. Well, ECRL 3, it is already in the progress of construction, and it's almost 40% right now into the project. So there is no possibility for us to make any changes in terms of cost reduction and so on, because that exercise has been done way back in 2019, and that was extensive because the costs have been reduced substantially during the renegotiation between 2018 to 2019, and I don't see any rooms for that to happen anymore at this point of time.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm mindful of time because we are standing in between the audience and their lunch. So perhaps just two more questions, maybe. Yeah. So also one of the questions that keeps popping up on the Slido is on the KL Singapore high-speed rail, right? So the big question that many of us has is that, you know, is this project still being considered for implementation in the medium to near term?
Well, I will say yes, medium term. I've asked the Prime Minister said and give me very clear instruction. We have no problem of implementing that project, but it must be a private sector-led project. So meaning that it's not through funding from the government.
Okay, thank you. And one last question. Now, YB, you know, we just wanted to get an idea of what are your priorities over the next few years as Minister of Transport? Now, we know that you are very passionate about digitalization, right? And you have started to implement that, you know, the digital road tax and all these things, right? And it seems that that's what you're trying to achieve is to make the rakyat's experience, you know, a lot experience with, say, the JPJ, a lot more seamless, a lot better, right? Perhaps you can, you know, tell us what your future plans are across the next few years.
Well, I think the future plans, most of it we have covered just now, from airports to maritime to public transport. All that, of course, is have to be follow up from time to time. And in terms of digitalization, as far as I'm concerned, my approach is that not to reinvent the wheel. Apply things which is easy to implement. Apply things which have been implemented in other sectors, in other industry. Such as for public transport, one simple example I said, in terms of our payment system. Why should we reinvent the wheel and spend millions of ringgit to do a special system where the current system is already, most of the payment system are already open. Just apply it and do it. So my instruction to Prasarana, spend no money in terms of payment system. Apply whatever open system we have right now, just do it, open up, make it easier, make it more usable for the users. That's it.
Thank you. So thank you. Just to wrap up, YB. So we want to thank you, YB, for sharing with us, you know, this insightful conversation, you know, across such a broad, you know, number of subjects. Now we are. I'm sure I speak for all of us when I say we are all looking forward, you know, to the expansion of our infrastructure capacity to drive growth, and certainly, you know, a better transportation experience for the rakyat. Thank you very much, YB.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think infrastructure will be still the key.